There is, believe it or not, a worldwide government-sponsored but naturally secretive program that aims to shield us from the truth, as well as silently spray us with all manner of biological agents and nasty chemicals. Enter the chemtrail conspiracy. Some people believe that every time you see a plane crossing the sky, no matter what its purpose, civil, military or just the morning post, its engines are dumping things into our atmosphere that we really rather they wouldn't dump. That is of course not quite the case. The plane leaves behind a condensation trail, or contrail, in the sky, consisting mainly of water vapour. It is in effect an artificial cloud. Depending on weather conditions, including how warm it is, the altitude of the trail, which way the wind shear is and so on, it can mean some trails lasting longer than others, which, to a conspiracy theorist, means there must be something other than water vapour in these trails, now called chemical trails, or chemtrails. What has this got to do with Nibiru? The planet isn't affected by trails in our atmosphere, and we're not affected by them either, because there aren't any nasty chemicals in them. But something is affected. Our sight. No, that's not to say looking at too many contrails will make you go blind, but Nibiru believers use the chemtrail conspiracy as proof that governments are blocking out our skies with artificial clouds, so that we can't see Nibiru. That sounds obvious, right? If we know where Nibiru is, we can block its view by passing a couple of scheduled planes across the sky. Genius! One slight flaw though, it seems according to believers that as soon as chemtrails, or indeed your everyday run-of-the-mill clouds are in the sky, Nibiru is actually easier to see. Yes, you heard that right, with things blocking our view, it is easier to see. How is that so? It links back to what we know about lens flares and pareidolia. An image of a cloudless sunny sky, it has an obvious lens flare, we can't really say it's Nibiru, though some of course will try. But an image of a cloudy, chemtraily sunny sky, there's more chance of light reflecting off the clouds, for example, more seemingly unexplained sources of light or shapes. But we know there aren't any new sources of light, there is only the sun. We think we see strange shapes and we jump to conclusions. Just think, how can something be easier to see when it's obscured from our view? And invisible in broad daylight? It doesn't make any sense. An invisible planet is simply a planet that doesn't exist. An article appeared recently that suggested that the Earth was pelted with comets by a hypothetical star lurking somewhere on the fringes of our solar system, causing us a bit of trouble. Commonly called Nemesis, and comically called the Death Star, this hypothetical object has also been called, of course, Nibiru. So what is going on here? It has been suggested that a red or brown dwarf somewhere near or in our solar system was responsible for a perceived cycle of mass extinctions found in the geological record, occurring roughly every 26 million years. It is of course a bit of a challenge to work out what caused each extinction event, and if there is a clear cycle in the first place, but many people are working on answering such questions every day, and there are instruments that may finally be able to offer us evidence of such an object, allowing us to see if such a hypothetical star could indeed play a part in our solar system. Launched in December 2009, the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer may be our best bet. It scans the entire sky up to 10 times in a number of different wavelengths. You can think of it as our beloved telescopic friend IRAS, but with 1,000 times better sensitivity. About a third of the smaller objects it will see, such as asteroids and near-Earth objects, will be new discoveries. That is, after all, what science does, discover, unlike Nibiru believers. It has been said of this article, for example, that NASA admits Nemesis exists, and that the purpose of WISE is to detect it. That simply isn't the case. We've been well aware of the hypothesis of such an object from back in the days of IRAS, and the models and calculations have been built upon since then. What we haven't yet got is the complete picture, but we might be on the verge of saying yes, it exists, or no, still not enough to work on. If WISE or other future instruments detect such an object, can we say it is Nibiru? Of course, many believers will say yes, it is Nibiru. Okay, it doesn't have the wings they said it did, or the planets orbiting around it, or the alien race, or the 3,600 year orbit around our sun, and it was a slightly different type of star, and wasn't found where we said it would be, and it didn't destroy the Earth or its people in 2012, but nonetheless, it is Nibiru. The believers were right. The problem is that believers don't really have much of an idea of what Nibiru actually is, partly because they bunny hop onto new theories and discoveries and claim it as their own. Here is a question to believers. If you know Nibiru exists, why aren't you sharing your knowledge? Why aren't you telling scientists exactly where to point their equipment? Why aren't you backing their efforts or proposing new ones? Why are you just sat on the internet reshaping new discoveries so that they fit neatly into your vision and shouting conspiracy every 5 minutes? If you think Nibiru exists, prove it. Please, offer us some evidence that we can test. If we reach the same conclusion, we advance science that little bit further. If we don't reach the same conclusion, well, we still learn. We learn that something isn't quite right, or that something is flat out wrong. But we all know why no proof has been offered up, don't we? Nobody has it, and until we can say so either way, all we have is a hypothesis. All Nibiru is an idea. Confirmation of a binary dwarf star next to the Sun, say Spanish astronomers. What will the naysayers say next? Good question. I'm hesitant to call myself a naysayer or a debunker, but here we go. The object in question has come to be known as G1.9, so we'll stick with that. It's not far off its official title as a supernova remnant, but the claims made about it definitely are. The problem of this discovery dates back at least as far as August 2009, when this post appeared on the Starviewer team's blog. It offers an overview of their research, which they say they've not yet published, but apparently have requested time at an observatory to confirm their findings. As of August 2010, nothing has surfaced, nothing has been published, and it's not surprising when you look at the claims. Claim 1 mentions a distance of between 60 and 66 astronomical units. That's over 5.5 billion miles away, twice as far as Neptune is from the Sun. In astronomical terms, that's pretty close. It's also completely incorrect for G1.9, which, in all 6 of the published papers I've read about it, and I'm sure in others that I haven't read, it's shown to have a distance of around 8.5 kiloparsecs. That's 1.7 billion astronomical units. That's in the region of 162 quadrillion miles. It's over 25,000 light years away. On the edge of our solar system, it is definitely not. Claims 2 and 3 mention that methane is present. Methane can be found in certain classes of brown dwarfs, but once again there is no scientific paper that has found methane in G1.9, or indeed has found that it's a brown dwarf in the first place. The Starviewer article mentions methane is represented as blue in the imagery, except that the imagery they use is a composite of 2 observations, one from the X-ray imaging of G1.9 by the Chandra X-ray Observatory in 2007, shown in orange, and a radio observation from the Very Large Array Radio Observatory taken in 1985, shown in, you guessed it, blue. Claim 4 states that there are at least 2 orbiting bodies around G1.9, and once again there are no papers which support this view. We'll come back to this claim later on as we look through the rest of the article. Figure 1 shows us where G1.9 is. This image is the most accurate this article will ever get. G1.9 really is there or thereabouts. They correctly say it's hard to find invisible light. In fact, the supernova explosion would have been obscured to observers on the Earth by the dust of the Milky Way that sits between us and it. We would have seen it explode as a bright light in the mid-19th century, had it been anywhere else in the sky. Instead, we can only see it in other wavelengths that are not obscured like visible light is. Figure 2 brings Gliese 229a to the analysis, a known red dwarf 19 light-years away. It even has a brown dwarf orbiting it, Gliese 229b. However, the imagery it uses to compare G1.9 to Gliese 229 are unlabelled, unsourced and inaccurate for both objects. Here are 2 images that we do actually have that show G1.9 and Gliese 229a and b, and there just isn't anything to compare. The next image claims to show an original image, and that original image run through what amounts to a few Photoshop filters. For starters, we know it isn't an original image, but a composite, and a quick test of increasing the lightness on the hue, saturation and lightness filter results in highlighting the compression artifacts found in images saved as JPEGs. Lightening the image does not reveal planets that aren't there in the first place, it just introduces and enhances problems within the image. Then there are quite a few 3D images, which scientifically are next to useless in the context they are claimed to show, unless you want to know which pixels have higher values than the others. The higher the spike, the closer to white the value of the pixel. That's all that's being shown, no matter which way you look at it. In reality, G1.9 is more like an expanding shell, the speed of which has enabled us to work out when it first exploded, among other findings. Nowhere that I have read in the published papers have suggested that G1.9 is a brown dwarf on the edge of the solar system surrounded by rocky planets. What the papers do say is that it's the youngest supernova remnant yet discovered, and it will continue to be studied in a variety of ways. But until anyone publishes a paper with some serious evidence for it to be a brown dwarf instead, and not some Photoshop job with a smattering of baseless assumptions, then we must continue to side with the evidence, not the nonsense. Even the Starviewer team should be viewed sceptically. Their website does include articles on artificial structures on Mars and alien skulls, for example. While any new discovery of things near our solar system will be huge news, G1.9 is not it. No evidence supports the claims, and this isn't the first time I've said something like that. It's been a while since I felt the need for a video. All I saw on my periodic dives into the YouTube results for Nibiru were tired old claims of stereo censorship, umpteen videos of Venus in the evening skies, and bewilderment at how Wikisky is apparently to be used as evidence. I still see these worn-out, debunked claims get repeated ad nauseum in the vain effort that shouting for long enough will make something true. If that logic works, I'm the richest man in the world, I'm the richest man in the world, I'm the richest man. The unrelenting barrage of boredom never ceases, and as we've seen from plenty of proponents in the past, any piece of news gets leapt upon as if it's the holy grail of Planet X proof. So what has spurred me from slumber on this subject? Yet another article picking up steam on the Nemesis front. Now I can explain this in a nutshell. There are many theories, there still isn't any solid evidence, and even if it were to exist, it could not under any circumstances, and practically by definition, swing by the Earth every 3,600 years, a la Nibiru claims. There, video done. But it all sounds too familiar to me, because back in March I said exactly the same thing the last time this buzz came around. What's changed? With the science, very little has changed. There is still no evidence for any proposed object yet, though the WISE mission most likely to find that evidence has been completed and has already found thousands of new asteroids, comets and near-Earth objects. With proponents, again very little has changed. They still hop onto news claiming victory, despite apparently failing to read any article they present as evidence, complete with quotes expressing astronomers' beliefs and opinions rather than results. Results which they don't even have yet, I might add. They still use persuasive language too, notably the word admit, with NASA more often than not being the guilty party merely by being associated with space. I genuinely ask anyone, proponent or debunker alike, to quote any astronomer admitting they withheld data on such a potential object, especially when you realise that the very data they are supposed to have admitted to with regards to this recent article hasn't even been analysed yet. Science wants to show whether something is there or not. Astronomers don't just sit around and twiddle their thumbs. Mere weeks ago, the Kepler mission revealed over 1,200 potential extrasolar planets, of which 68 are potentially Earth-sized, and 5 of those are potentially within the habitable zone of their star. Note the key word in all of that: potential. There is as much potential for there being a distant solar system object as there is potential for it not to be there at all, and as it currently stands, all available evidence says it isn't there. We await further evidence, potentially revealing yet another planetary neighbour. But don't mistake, or worse report, that potential to be proof when it's not the case. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you've lived through syzygy. Well done. Now what is syzygy? With regards to astronomy, syzygy is the alignment of celestial bodies, like the Sun, Earth and Moon for example. That's one of the reasons why I opened by saying that you've lived through it already. You've lived through it a fair few times in fact. There can be anywhere from 2 to 5 solar eclipses each year for example, some more of a spectacle than others, but all are alignments. It happens the other way too, with lunar eclipses. Indeed, any point at which you can line up any number of celestial bodies, you've got yourself a syzygy. According to some people, there's a really important syzygy heading our way, and it'll happen on the date of all dates, December 21st, 2012. They call it the Galactic Alignment. The Galactic Alignment. Perhaps because the Galactic Syzygy is simply too far-fetched a name or too confusing to say or spell. The Galactic Syzygy. In this syzygy, the Earth and the Sun are aligned with the galactic centre. But that's not all, oh no, for the Earth will also dip through the galactic plane. As the Sun orbits around the galactic centre, a complete trip taking about 225 million years, it also oscillates up and down through the galactic plane. It does so about 2.7 times per orbit. We've only just gone through it, astronomically speaking, several million years ago. It's estimated that the Sun has made about 25 orbits of the galactic centre in its lifetime. It's still going around. The Earth has orbited the Sun about 4.5 billion times, and we're still here too. But have we ever been in a galactic alignment?
Turns out, if you go to December 21st and look at the star charts, it's true. The center of the galaxy, the Sun and the Earth, will come into perfect alignment. It will. It's true. It's true. What the site does not tell you is that that happens every year on December 21st. They left that out of the account.
Perhaps saying it happens in 2012 gives us some time to prepare. And by prepare, maybe I mean scare. It is only now, in our generation, where we have the instruments and the knowledge to really be aware of such wonders. Not dangers, wonders. But then there are people out there who abuse that knowledge and misinform those without it for their own personal gain. And do you know something else? Nibiru is such a confusing mess of ideas that it has nothing to do with galactic alignment. That's right, as if the threat of Nibiru wasn't enough, we also need to fear the rest of the galaxy. Will this nonsense never end?
There is no such thing as planet Nibiru or whatever they say. It's just fiction.
Doctor, how did you flip my text?
I've reversed the polarity of the neutron flow.
Oh. A lot of stuff is going to happen in 2012, if you believe the doomsday stories. So let's have some fun, pick up on an interesting natural occurrence, and then blame it on a celestial object that doesn't exist. You might have come across the idea that Nibiru will fly past the Earth, and its gravity will influence our planet in one of two ways. Either the magnetic poles will flip over, or the geographic poles will shift. Confusingly for us, believers both can't decide what will happen and can't get their terminology right, confusing one type of shift with the other. So let's tackle them both. First of all, geomagnetic reversal, often called a polar flip by believers.
Was done by a sudden reversal of polarity in an electromagnetic field.
In this scenario, the Earth's magnetic field will flip over, and in doing so, expose us to the solar winds, our invisible magnetic field shielding us reduced to nothing. As you might imagine, this is a fairly scary thing, to a believer. To those who know what's really going on, the story is a little different. The Earth's magnetic field is generated deep in its core, where an electrically conducting ocean of iron is in constant motion. All moving charged particles produce magnetic fields, and the Earth's field extends tens of thousands of kilometers into space, called the magnetosphere. Geomagnetic reversals, where the field flips so that our compasses point the other way, for example, have happened many times in Earth's past. And while they aren't regular events, there is an estimation of about 300,000 years between each reversal. The last reversal we know of was about 780,000 years ago. Does that mean we're overdue for one? Maybe. But what makes you think waiting another 2 years will have any impact on waiting for the last 480,000? Let's suppose then that we're definitely going to have a reversal soon. What will happen? Well, instead of flipping over and falling apart like believers suggest, the magnetic fields will get messier, in a sense, tangled such that a magnetic North Pole could appear anywhere. But what about any when?
Reverse polarity.
That is correct, Mr. Scott.
That'll take some doing.
How long does the process take? Well, it's not 2 years, or 20 years. Not even in our lifetimes will we see it come to completion. It can take a couple of thousand years to complete a reversal, and it will remain as strong as ever throughout. It won't just flip and then decide not to show up for work.
I saw it. It turned round.
It did more than that. It reversed polarity and stabilized.
We would, however, have to remember which way our compasses are pointing. So, a geomagnetic reversal is far from the end of the world. What about a polar shift? This scenario is a little harder to work out. The polar shift occurs when the landmass underneath the North and South Poles are different from what they currently are. You're aware of plate tectonics and the movements of the continents, for example, and you can think of polar shifts in a similar but not identical way. What happens here is a process called true polar wander, where not just the continents on the Earth's crust move, but so does the mantle below them, so that the Earth balances itself out due to its constant rotation. True polar wander occurs at a rate of about 1 degree or less per million years, the last rapid shift occurring 800 million years ago, and nothing much of note occurring within the last 200 million years. So what could cause a shift? The best example might be found on Mars, in the Tharsis region, where the tallest volcano in the solar system is to be found, Olympus Mons. The region is dominated by this and other large volcanoes, and the theory states that as they were formed away from the equator, and as Mars continued to rotate, the newly formed weight needed to be evenly distributed, causing these formations to move, in effect, towards the equator. Sounds strange indeed, but this is where the evidence leads us, not just on Mars, but on Earth too. Where then does Nibiru come into this? It is claimed that Nibiru, being much more massive than the Earth, has quite an influence on the Earth's core, which in turn twists and turns to follow Nibiru, causing all sorts of mayhem, and in many cases, stories of the Earth's crust splitting apart and all hell breaking loose. The scarier the better, perhaps. In the same way as our future reversal selves needing to read our compasses differently, our future polar shifted selves will have to move our maps around a bit, and also cope with the possibility of the tropics moving to the Arctic and the ice caps melting. But unlike geomagnetic reversal, there is nothing to suggest that any drastic polar wander is to occur naturally, and of course no evidence of Nibiru either. What we have, once again, is a somewhat problematic event that takes millions of years to occur, stated to happen in our lifetimes on a specific date by an object that doesn't exist. Do you really believe that will still happen in 2012?
Damn it, Cal! Solar flare. We've got a shockwave headed straight for us.
Can you reverse the polarity?
I'll do my best.
It is said that during Nibiru's passing, its effect upon the Earth will be so great that it will be able to stop our planet from rotating, for a few days at least. Just how much of a task is that? In February 2010, an earthquake occurred off the coast of Chile. It was strong enough to move the entire city of Concepcion 3 meters to the west, and to shorten the length of a day by 1.26 microseconds, just over 1/1,000,000th of a second. But earthquakes aren't strong enough to bring the Earth to a standstill. The detonation of a nuclear weapon is a powerful event, and its effects will be forever recorded in history. They can cause minor earthquakes, which could in turn trigger larger scale events, but they also aren't enough to stop the Earth. There are even proposed uses of peaceful nuclear explosions to create artificial harbours, canals and dams, but none stop the Earth from rotating. It has been calculated that for nuclear weapons to have any major impact on the Earth's rotation, you'd need 5 × 10 to the 14 megatons of explosive power. That's a 5 followed by 14 zeros. The largest nuclear explosion was about 50 megatons. There are about 23,300 nuclear warheads on Earth, but of course we'll never know the actual numbers for sure. If all of those were operational, however, and all of them had 50 megaton yields, we'd have 1,165,000 megatons of explosives. A lot less than the needed 500 quadrillion megatons. Hopefully you're now getting an idea of the immense effort needed to stop the Earth from ground level. But what about from space? Now I must admit my grasp for physics isn't ideal for explaining these types of calculations, but that doesn't stop me from researching them, and one of many places to find such information comes from Stephen Dutch, who has a site about science in relation to movies, media and pseudo-scientific nonsense, among many other things. On this page in particular, he talks you through the possibilities of an asteroid impact causing the Earth to stop rotating, as well as a few handy things to know. For example, about 98% of the energy released in the impact that he puts forward would be released in other forms, including heat. So much heat in fact that it would melt 5 times the mass of the Earth. And that's not melting like the ice cube in your Coca-Cola, it's melting solid rock. The point is, in an impact that stops the Earth from rotating, rotation would be the least of our worries. But Nibiru is not meant to impact the Earth, just to pass by it. We've just seen the immense power needed to stop the Earth rather directly. Are we then supposed to believe that this power can come solely from the magnetic field of Nibiru?
It's impossible. Not impossible. Inevitable.
That's impossible.
This isn't just impossible with a capital I, try a capital impossible as well. I'm sure some believers will insist that Nibiru will kindly start the rotation back up for us. If that's the case, would you also kindly submit your peer-reviewed scientific papers documenting how this entire flyby, rotation-pausing via magnetic field event is possible to your nearest scientist, because it currently goes against everything we know. And that's with a capital everything.
These people are natural-born idiots, if you ask me. They don't appreciate what they have here. This ship is the match of any vessel within 100 light years, and what do they do with it? Well, let's see if we can find some space anomaly today that might rip it apart.
The apocalypse is coming. What do? Run to the hills? Well, not so fast. Common sense dictates that the higher up you are from your local sea level, the less chance there is of drowning in the sea, for which there is certainly some logic. But do you even know where the seas will be after the Earth goes through the wild claims made about the havoc caused by Nibiru? Take the claim that the Earth will, for whatever reason, stop rotating. At the equator, the Earth beneath your feet is moving at 1600 kilometers an hour. You don't notice, of course, because you're moving at the same speed. But you'll notice it if the Earth were to stop in an instant. You'll notice it because you and everything else not attached to the ground will still be moving eastward at 1600 kilometers an hour until it hits something. So if you ran to the hills and hid in a mountain cave, you might avoid the seas, but you'll still fly. At least the cave walls are likely to stop you pretty quickly, though you might want to line them with a few pillows. But what about a gradual slowdown? We're already gradually slowing down due to the effects of tidal forces from the moon. Our day is getting longer by a rate of around 2 milliseconds every 100 years. But that's not exactly an end-of-the-world threat. So what if we were to say that Nibiru caused the Earth to slow down to a stop over 2 months, for example? Again, you'd certainly notice some slowing down from 1,000 miles an hour to no miles an hour, but you won't all be hurtling headfirst into the nearest walls in an instant. Still, it wouldn't be too good, and providing you'd survived the initial hiccup, you'd have some more problems to cope with. The notable problem would come in the form of the day getting longer and longer and longer, to the point where it would match the length of the year. If your mountain retreat came to a stop in the middle of a day that lasts months, I hope you've got air conditioning. The other problem, as alluded to at the start of the video, is that of the seas. The centrifugal force that comes with the rotating Earth pushes things out. You actually weigh less towards the equator due to this force, and the seas bulge outward too. You may have heard that the Earth is an oblate spheroid, literally a squashed sphere. No rotation means the oceans of the world are no longer constrained by the centrifugal force, only by the Earth's gravity, and will therefore redistribute. We're not just talking creeping up the beaches, we're talking moving away from the equator entirely, filling up the space provided towards the poles. This map was the end result of a hypothetical slowdown of the Earth's rotation that took decades to occur. Even if you found yourself on the Florida coastline by the time the world started slowing down, provided you'd survived the initial troubles and had made sure you were capable of living through a day that lasts a year, you wouldn't need to relocate to the mountains at all. But look what would happen if you chose the wrong mountain range, or locked yourself in a bunker too far north of the equator. You'd be just as wet as the rest of us. An understanding of physics, of hypothetical scenarios or not, is essential in forward planning like this. If you wanted to minimise every effect on you in these scenarios, you'd have to be as close to the poles as possible while the Earth stopped spinning, then get as close to the equator as possible before the seas came in, all the while working out whether you wanted to stay on the day side or the night side of the planet, or try to follow the border between the two. Now remember, Nibiru proponents claim many other things besides just a stopping of the Earth's rotation. What if you had prepared for all of this, but had not factored in a complete change of the Earth's axial tilt, or an impact event from somewhere? You can plan all you like, but if you're not aware of why you are doing it, or if the information you are going by is flawed in the first place, then no amount of preparation will make any difference. But then it doesn't really matter either, because Nibiru does not exist. Many of the claims made about it are physically impossible even if it were to exist. We are still, decades after Nibiru was first written about by Sitchin, waiting for proponents to offer some credible evidence for its existence. Nothing has come forward, so why run for cover? According to some people's view of history, this is the image that proves the existence of a Planet X, and it comes from the cradle of civilization, carved by humans thousands of years ago, before the Greeks, before the Egyptians. How could such a civilization know so much about our solar system? Is it A, they didn't know so much about the solar system, or B, they were told of this knowledge by the alien race they regarded as gods? This famous image is the cylinder seal VA243, put forward as evidence by Zecharia Sitchin in his book The 12th Planet. He concluded that this was our solar system, and that these people knew of the same planets we know today. There are, of course, a few things wrong with this. We assume that the symbol in the centre refers to our Sun, with the dots surrounding it being the planets. This symbol appears in many places throughout Sumerian history, but it refers to a star, or a deity that isn't the Sun. Ah, I hear you cry, our Sun is a star. That is of course correct, but this is a culture that regards the Sun as a god, worthy of its own symbol, separate from that of other objects, other gods. There is no supporting evidence to suggest that the symbol on this seal refers to the Sun in the centre of a solar system. So we have a star symbol surrounded by dots. What are the dots? If you've read The 12th Planet, you're going to say the planets of the solar system right about now. Handily, the book offers us a diagram of which dot supposedly represents each planet. There's Mercury, Venus, the Earth and our Moon, Mars, the unknown planet, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, Uranus and Neptune. Hands up if you can spot any problems with this. The obvious one, of course, is that Pluto is in the wrong place, by order of planets. If we were still calling it a planet, we'd put it to the end of the list, up here. Now, this dot is said to be our Moon. It's an important object to us and our night sky, so important in fact that it too was worthy of its own symbol, and it too was of course called a god. You know, perhaps the Sumerian who carved this was sticking it to the man. To hell with the old gods. Long live our alien overlords with their maps of the solar system. I mean, who was he to question the authority of an alien deity, right? Even if that alien deity is inaccurate by today's scientific standards set by mere mortals. I've heard it being said that this is just a carving, cut the guy some slack, he can't be too accurate. Well, I'll give you that. He can't, for example, get the accurate scales between Jupiter and the Earth, nor can he put the orbits at the correct distances. If he did, he'd run out of room pretty quickly. But ignoring all of that, if he's aware of Pluto, why isn't he aware of Saturn's rings? If this knowledge did come from an alien race, surely they're quite capable of seeing the rings too, no? If they were capable of seeing the rings, why aren't they capable of seeing the moons that are either larger than our moon or larger relative to their planet? Pluto's largest, Charon, is half Pluto's size. Jupiter's Ganymede and Callisto are bigger than our moon, as is Saturn's Titan. Titan even has an atmosphere. Surely that's important enough to mark it down. But no, it can't carve everything, right? At least not on this supposed map. We have records, lists even, of what was seen in the night skies of the time, carved by the people who saw them. They count 7 planets: the Sun, the Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus and Mercury. We didn't discover Pluto until 1930. Do you still think the Sumerians knew about it thousands of years ago, but then only marked it as one dot on one cylinder seal without labelling it? Hopefully you're seeing the sheer amount of belief you have to have in this carving being true, despite the numerous faults it has, and we've only scratched the surface. The most accessible source of information on this seal that I've come across, as well as the other claims that Sitchin proposes, is Mike Heiser's sitchiniswrong.com. Sure, you might not like the name, but all the evidence is there for you to look through, explained by Mike and backed up with his sources. Sources that the scholars who research this period in history agree with. Sources that are the standard, the known and the provable. Now, even though we know that this isn't the solar system, and we've shown that in many ways, what then is the supposed explanation for the unknown planet? We'll find that out in the next video. So just what is this unknown planet the seal refers to? According to the arrangement of planets that Zecharia Sitchin attributes to each of these dots, the unknown planet sits between Mars and Jupiter. Sitchin mentions Bode's law, a hypothesis that the bodies in some orbital systems, such as our own solar system, orbit at semi-major axes in an exponential function of planetary sequence. That is to say that using the law you could predict planets that hadn't yet been seen through a telescope. The theory was described as interesting, but not much more was done with it, until Uranus was found in 1781 and found to fit within the predicted series. Before long another was found in 1801, that of Ceres, lying in sequence between Mars and Jupiter. Unfortunately, this was the last object to neatly fit the hypotheses. With the discoveries of Neptune, Pluto and Eris all falling outside of the theory, Bode's law has been left as a historical novelty of sorts. Sitchin correctly goes on to say that since the discovery of Ceres, we've also found an entire asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, with Ceres as the largest object within it, containing nearly a third of the mass of the asteroid belt itself. However, he concludes that this must have meant that there was a planet here long ago, a planet that was destroyed, leaving only an asteroid field in its place. Let's see what happened according to Sitchin, who tries to map the events of the Babylonian creation myth with his view of the events of the solar system. That is to say that in his view, the creation myth is not just a story about gods, but the story of the planets and events of the solar system. I'll try to explain the events as simply as I can. So, we have Apsu, Mumu, Lahamu, Lamu, Tiamat, Kishar, Anshar, Gaga, Anu, and Ea. At this time in the tale, Ea, the chief god, creates Marduk, even more powerful than he. Marduk roamed the place however he liked, but passing Ea made his belly swell, and passing Anu made chunks of his body break away, resulting in the four winds. Other gods, Tiamat among them, became distraught and soon enraged at Marduk, and sought to deal with him, creating 11 monsters. Chief among them was Kingu. All were given the appearance of gods. Kingu began to head out towards Marduk, but this upset the other gods. Tiamat had no right to create others. It was Anshar who, upon seeing the approaching Marduk, had the idea that he could be the one to destroy Tiamat. Anshar sent Gaga to tell the other gods to support Marduk. Marduk prepared for battle, and upon passing Kishar, brought forth 3 more winds, and he was on a course straight for Tiamat. As the short battle went on, however, it was not a clash between Marduk and Tiamat that proved fatal, but a collision of the evil winds to Tiamat's face. When the winds managed to cut open her belly, Marduk was able to shoot an arrow into Tiamat, extinguishing her life breath and leaving her lifeless. Her followers turned face, never again to act like the gods they claimed to be. Marduk took Kingu's tablet of destinies away for his own, such that he could return to the scene of his triumph and strengthen his hold on the vanquished gods. Indeed, Marduk soon returned, and looking over Tiamat's lifeless body once more, he cut her into 2 pieces. Into one piece the north wind crashed. With the other half of Tiamat, Marduk himself smashed to pieces, creating the Great Band, a bracelet that acts as a screen between the inner and outer planets. So, where once there was Tiamat and Kingu, there is now the Earth, the Moon, and the asteroid belt. Strange then that it's on the same map as the Earth and the Moon. Perhaps it represents the asteroid belt then. Or perhaps it isn't Tiamat at all, but Marduk. The very same Marduk that is destined to return to strengthen his hold on the vanquished gods. It's an interesting idea, using the creation stories to explain the solar system, but with all the evidence we have, it's simply not what happened. Today we know that no planet formed in this region of the solar system. The gravity of Jupiter was too strong to allow any planetesimals to form. Instead of material clumping together and getting larger over time, Jupiter's influence meant they slammed into each other far too fast for them to accrete into a planet. And yet, the Sumerians knew otherwise, thousands of years ago. Of course they did, for the aliens told them after all. Remember that this image is not labelled, nor is there any reference on any tablet to this image depicting the solar system, and no references to anything orbiting the Sun at all. The text on the seal even translates to Dubsiga Ili Ilat, your servant, as opposed to these are the planets that orbit this star, our Sun. The only way we can say what the image depicts is to just guess at what it depicts. So if we were to assume that this is Marduk, where then is Nibiru in this tale? For that, we'll be reading the dictionary. Find out why in the next video. When you come across a new word that you haven't heard before, one of your first thoughts is to look it up and see what it means. Nibiru is no exception. We've researched some of what it means according to believers in the form of a doomsday event, but what does it mean in its original context? For that, we'll take a look into the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary. For those that aren't too familiar with languages that were around thousands of years ago, Sumerian and Akkadian languages borrowed from each other, to the point where many of the people were bilingual. Soon, however, it was Akkadian that spread out as the spoken language, with Sumerian being used as a sacred ceremonial language of sorts. Much of what we know about the many Sumerian tablets is largely through translating the Sumerian cuneiform into Akkadian. Handily, there are even lists of words and their meanings that have been found on tablets, an ancient dictionary if you will, that aids us in working out what is being said. If, however, you want a second opinion, the standard dictionary definition complete with thorough lists of examples in context not being good enough for you, you can look through the Pennsylvania Sumerian Dictionary too. Now that we know of 2 dictionaries concerning the language where Nibiru originated, Let's have a look and see what it actually means. You'll find Nibiru under the heading Nibiru, where it has one of three meanings, the most immediate of interest to us being one of the names of the planet Jupiter. What's important to remember is that not once on any record we have of the time is there a reference to Nibiru being a separate planet in a strange orbit. This is the Mulapin, a complete text regarding the night sky, and in it there is a passage. When the stars of Enlil have been finished, one big star, although its light is dim, divides the sky in half and stands there. That is the star of Marduk, Nibiru, Jupiter. It keeps changing its position and crosses the sky. What it is saying is that they are one and the same. Jupiter is Marduk, Nibiru is Jupiter. They all refer to one point in the sky. Nibiru was even used to describe Mercury in some places, so we know that it isn't a separate object. We have written records that say that this point of light is visible every year to the naked eye. We have no written records that say it has anything to do with aliens, planetary collisions, elliptical 3,600-year orbits, nothing. The only way you could possibly arrive at that view after looking at the evidence is to disregard the evidence and make it out however you see fit. But don't just take my word for it. There are many who do the research for you and do it in a way you'll understand. Once again, my starting point was Mike Heiser at Sitchin is Wrong, a man who is capable of translating roughly a dozen ancient languages. I don't know about you, but asking someone who actually knows about ancient languages is generally a good starting point when looking up the definition of Nibiru. Alternatively, you could even start at Wikipedia. At least you're doing some sort of research there, even if it's the bare minimum. The point is, you're not going to learn much if you only follow one side of the story. In the case of the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, there are 90 years of translations that do not support your claims of Nibiru.
And the idea at that time was to create a kind of encyclopedic dictionary of the Assyrian and Babylonian languages, which we now call Akkadian, as deciphered from the millions of cuneiform tablets that have survived and have come to light through excavations, mostly in the last century and a half, 2 centuries. So the idea then in 1921 was to begin to decipher, make translations of all of these great records, and to assemble a dictionary that would cover 2,000 plus years of the language.
All of this evidence used together shows how this image is not what it has been claimed to be. And that isn't just someone saying, no, of course it isn't the solar system. It's someone saying why it isn't. Someone who uses all the evidence they have to come to a solid conclusion. Not someone who says, that looks like our solar system, sort of, therefore it is our solar system. Are we still meant to believe what is being said about this image? Is this still a map of the solar system? Proof. It's a nice thing to have, isn't it? It supports your claims, it allows others to share your knowledge, it's a key part of our understanding of pretty much everything there is. But who should prove what? Generally speaking, if you hold the positive claim of something, you also hold the burden of proof. It is up to you to prove that claim, not up to the rest of us to disprove it. What do I mean by that? To borrow an idea from Bertrand Russell, imagine that I were to say to you that behind the moon, in such an orbit around our planet that means it is never seen from Earth, there exists a spoon. You would turn to me and think I was a bit mad to claim such a thing, and of course you'd demand my proof of the spoon. You'd want me to back up my claim with some evidence. What you wouldn't expect is for me to reply to you, no, prove to me that I'm wrong. Prove that there is no spoon. You would also not expect me, upon hearing your disagreement, to declare you to be part of the conspiracy, part of the cover-up to stop the public from knowing of the spoon.
If you're not with me, then you're my enemy.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes. I will do what I must.
You will try.
Disagreements happen, it's part of life, and in disagreeing and working out why each of us hold opposing views, we in turn find out which view seems to be the correct one, through testing each hypothesis again and again. Disagreeing about the spoon does not make us sworn enemies, never to speak to each other again. Let's take another example. Imagine that I were to say to you that in an elliptical orbit around our Sun, lasting roughly 3,500 years, there exists Nibiru. Well, you would turn to me in the same way and think that I was a bit mad to claim such a thing, and of course you'd demand my proof. You'd want me to back up my claim with evidence. I of course ask this of Nibiru believers, and in these videos and comment sections I take some of the claims that are put forward and test them out for myself, like any one of us should do when faced with new information, a little bit of research. As you have seen, there's an awful lot of iffy claims out there, some flat out lies, others bending the truth, trying to fit it into their beliefs, and many that turn out to be nothing but an ordinary lens flare. In short, so far, there is no solid proof. And so, Nibiru believers, the burden of proof is still on your shoulders. You still haven't done enough to convince science that, for want of a better phrase, you're worth talking to. In order to change that, go back to the drawing board, rethink your approach, work out what can actually be done to prove Nibiru. Unfortunately, the furthest you seem to get is to find the most recent, vaguely similar story in the news, mould it into the Nibiru theme, and hope to pass that off as evidence. I hear, for example, that Nibiru caused Eyjafjallajökull to erupt, as the apparent increase in frequency of earthquakes and volcanoes must mean that Nibiru is getting closer. Well, prove it. Show me some data that says activity is increasing. Then show me the data that says that the root cause for the activity was a rogue object called Nibiru. Saying something is true doesn't make it true. Proving it true makes something true. Incidentally, you can bet your bottom dollar that the next earthly wobble will be blamed on Nibiru by someone too. Maybe it'll be the more pronounceable Catler. If all of this is what you think, prove it. It's that simple. But if you can't offer proof, and yes, I'm well aware that we're not all astrophysicists and the like, could you at least stop playing the conspiracy theory card? Because when you do, a few things happen. Firstly, any shred of credibility that you may have had is generally lost. Why? Because, secondly, you now hold the burden of proof for the conspiracy as well as for Nibiru. Do you see how quickly it tumbles, and how hard it then is to take you seriously? The government did it is not a get out of jail free card, it's just digging yourself a hole. And so I end with an open plea almost. Give me, give science, give the world the definitive proof of Nibiru that we ask for. Proof that we can agree on, and can see in the same light that you see it in. Make yourselves famous for discovering it, for actually pointing it out in the night sky, for explaining it such that a 10-year-old can understand it. Just don't, whatever you do, recycle the same old nonsense that has been proven wrong time and time again. Don't just tickle each other's egos to make you feel better that someone else agrees with you. Don't be the madmen with their spoons that you currently are.
Try to realize the truth.
What truth?
There is no spoon.
This is going to make you creep.
Research. Sometimes it flat out sucks. It can take a long time, it can cost a lot of money, and when you have enough data to arrive at a conclusion, it may turn out to be something you weren't expecting to get when you started researching in the first place. However, that research is absolutely necessary for furthering knowledge. It's absolutely vital if you wish to engage in the sciences. If you want Nibiru or Planet X or anything along those lines to become at all scientific, then you need to do the research.
You make a bold claim, somebody else has to be able to go out and test it.
What you should be doing is telling us what your hypothesis is, if you can agree on whether Nibiru is a planet near the Sun or a dwarf star on the edges of the solar system or whatever. Then how are you going to test that out? How are you going to gather and analyse the data you need? And once you know all of that, then you can test it until you finally come to a solid conclusion. Then somebody else can come along, grab your hypothesis, provided you manage to get one together, use the same tools to test it with, gather and analyse their own data in the same way, and test it until they come to a conclusion too.
If you don't have the data that other people can then go to their labs and run the experiment just like you did, if they can't get the same results, there's something wrong there, and in science we require that.
Only after passing all of this, only when lots of people reach the same conclusion as you, do you have something worth looking at, and worth investigating some more. Yes, that's right, further research. It doesn't stop at the conclusion. What research is not, of course, is dismissing all the evidence because you disagree with it. That's called willful ignorance. I was recently featured in a video concerning how to defeat a debunker. Incidentally, calling me or anybody else with similar views and videos a debunker essentially means you are defining Nibiru as bunk in the first place. If that's how you want to play, so be it. This bunk of yours deserves to be ripped apart and actually researched by someone. It was suggested that I remove my nose from the debunker's handbook and that you will never make any such new discovery with your nose buried in a book. You mean I won't learn the original meaning for the word Nibiru by looking it up in the dictionary? Books and stored knowledge are essential. You need to have a grasp of what is already known, because if you do not know the basics, how are you supposed to explain your claims? Take the recent fracas regarding stereo imagery. My approach was to look up how the instrument works, to see where the satellite is at any given point, to see the orbit of Venus in 3 dimensions, to research common image artifacts found in the same data, to ask those who work on that data what the processes are, how they get the data, what timescales are involved and so on. But your approach is to ignore all of that and insist that it is still an unknown object, like you've said from the start. It is implied in this How to Defeat a Debunker video that all of the research I and anybody else can do was actually useless. Because all that research shows you something that you as a believer do not like, it is therefore wrong. And yet you have the nerve to suggest that you have done the research, but do not show what research you have done. Doesn't that strike anyone as a little strange? How there are a multitude of sources that support the view that this is Venus, but all of these sources are ignored and the same unproven nonsense is said again and again until the debunkers go away. Well, I'm sorry. If your evidence is all in your head or your heart, whereas ours is testable, verifiable and free for anyone to check for themselves, I think we can begin to see where each of us stands, and how important research is in separating fact from fiction. Research is not optional here. It is required for anyone to take Nibiru claims seriously. What I do is take a proper look at the claims, find out where they come from and find out what we actually know about the evidence in the claim. All of what I do can be done by anybody else, and more often than not, it doesn't take a whole lot of reading to learn of something contrary to the claims. In short, I do the research that you don't bother to do yourselves. Call it debunking if you want, but even doing that is doing research. Even debunking something shows you what it really is, a load of old bunk. When believers show us skeptics some research that makes us question what is known to science, then we'll take note of what they have to offer. But saying that you disagree with the overwhelming evidence and then not offering anything in return that supports your view is not research, it's nonsense.
Have you thought about that? Have you thought, what else could be explaining this? Because if you don't do it, somebody else will, usually with great glee, in a published public forum.
We humans like answers. We like to know why something happened the way it did, because knowing something is much easier for some of us to cope with than being clueless. Recently, there was an impact event on Jupiter. What caused it? It could have been an asteroid, a comet, or it could have been something to do with Nibiru. But we don't yet have enough evidence for any of those claims. In 2009, there was a similar impact event on Jupiter. It could have been caused by a comet, based on how comets are known to move through the solar system and similarities to a known impact event, that of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 in 1994. Or it could have been Nibiru, slinging asteroids into Jupiter. We have strong leads for the comet, and no leads for Nibiru. In May this year, a sinkhole appeared in Guatemala, 20 metres wide and 30 metres deep. It could have been the bad drainage system and the composition of the soil and rock of the area, the ever-flowing water eroding its way through, or it could have been Nibiru, influencing the ground from afar. We have good evidence for the natural processes, and no evidence for Nibiru. In April, we saw everybody's favourite Icelandic volcanic eruption, Eyjafjallajökull. It could have been another volcanic eruption from a volcano known to erupt relatively frequently, or it could have been the stretching of the Earth's crust by Nibiru. We have good evidence for all the events on the ground and in the ash cloud, but we have no evidence for Nibiru. In February, an 8.8 magnitude earthquake occurred off the coast of Chile. It could have been that the area sat on an active plate boundary, a boundary that had generated megathrust earthquakes for a long time in Earth's history. Or it could have been Nibiru, pulling at our mantle, shifting the plates around due to its magnetic field. We can say a fair few things about the plate boundary, but cannot offer anything for Nibiru. In all these examples of natural events, we can trace a cause. We might not have been in the right place at the right time to see something directly, but we know enough from similar events and can study the effects even further in order to learn more about the cause. What we are doing is actively searching for a cause in order to learn more about both the cause and effects. In doing so, we rule out some causes and we find evidence for causes that we didn't originally consider. But if we instead immediately conclude that the cause must be Nibiru, then we're not finding evidence at all. We are in fact ignoring the evidence we do have, and as we've seen in previous videos, biases like that need to be removed from our hypothesis and testing. When you say that Nibiru is the cause, you must offer evidence of the link between cause and effect. You must state why this event was caused by Nibiru and not whatever the evidence appears to say. Think of it this way. Would you accept me at face value if I said that the sinkhole was caused by the spoon behind the moon? No, you'd want my evidence, and so we want your evidence. Think Nibiru causes earthquakes? Prove it. Think solar flares are influenced by Nibiru? Prove it. Of course, to prove those things, you'd also need to prove Nibiru's existence, so we'd like to see evidence of that as well. Question. The news reports that a sinkhole formed underneath a swimming pool. What caused it? Answer. Nibiru. Wait a minute. Sinkholes are not uncommon, and there are a number of processes that form them, processes that do not involve anything other than what happens here on Earth. That is to say, everything can be explained without invoking a mysterious planet that we have no evidence of, in the same way that air travel can be explained without needing to imagine that Pegasus or Santa's reindeer are pulling us along. Composition of the rock plays a major role when it comes to sinkholes, with limestone, for example, capable of being eroded by nothing more than circulating groundwater. Over time, after being steadily eroded, the limestone will not be able to support whatever is to be found above it, and it collapses. What may be reported as a sinkhole in the news may turn out not to be a sinkhole at all, despite the obvious similarities, namely the hole in the ground. The hole found in Guatemala this year, for example, is not a sinkhole, but a piping pseudokarst. Similar, yes, but by definition not a sinkhole, and it wasn't carved by the moonspoon, as some may have previously thought. But it's not just Mother Nature or the moonspoon who can carve rock. We mere humans have been tunnelling for thousands of years. We're no strangers to how they manage to hold up the earth above them, and what happens when they fail. Just like the erosion of limestone, tunnelling, sewer systems, abandoned wells and septic tanks all weaken the space they occupy, and can, in time, collapse. With what we know about the land on which the swimming pool sat, from geological surveys and so on, the findings of the town engineer,
a sewer inspector, a pool code enforcer, utilities inspectors,
whom already suspect the more likely cause of the collapse as
an abandoned well or a septic tank.
We can have an educated guess at the answer to that question. That is to say, we can research and investigate further rather than jumping to conclusions that have absolutely no supporting evidence. So, based on everything we can test and verify, the results of the physical investigations and the knowledge of how sinkholes form, what is the most likely candidate for causing the hole beneath the swimming pool? Nibiru, obviously. According to many proponents, the Earth is somehow getting worse. Events like earthquakes are occurring more often, and those darn sinkholes are back in greater numbers. Or are they? In fact, what is the number for sinkholes anyway? What is normal on Earth? Earthquakes are more common than you think, countless thousands of which you wouldn't even have noticed unless they were reported on the news, and countless thousands of which you wouldn't even have noticed if you were standing on top of them, the tremors being just too small for you to register what was going on. But what about those sinkholes? It should come as no surprise to learn that they too are normal. Their formation is well known, as well as the impact man-made structures like mines can have on them. But what are the numbers? What is normal for a sinkhole? In the United States alone, as much as 40% of the landmass sits atop of vaporite rocks, water soluble and susceptible to dissolving away, leading to land subsidence, including sinkholes. Around 17,000 square miles of the United States has been directly affected by land subsidence. While not all sinkholes, put all that land in one spot and you can cover an area the size of New Hampshire and Vermont combined. Notable states for sinkholes include Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, Missouri and Texas. Missouri has records of 160 catastrophic collapses since 1970. Florida has so many they've got their own educational sinkhole poster, and it doesn't even show all of them. You can even get records of events reported to the Department of Environmental Protection in Florida, with over 3,000 entries for all kinds of land subsidence, including the ever-mystical sinkhole. Normal on Earth simply isn't what proponents think. Normal is a case of actually knowing what's around you and seeing how it works. It seems rather normal that proponents willfully ignore reality, for example, and it's just as normal for the world to keep rumbling on. I can tell you about the moonspoon in great detail. I know where it is in relation to the Earth and the Moon at any given time. I know that it can never be seen from Earth, and that no satellite thus far has journeyed far enough above the surface of the Moon to take any useful images of the spoon. I know that even those that do fly high enough cannot see the spoon either, as the spoon is so small it cannot be resolved within any imagery. I also know that it's both impossibly shinier than this representation, and yet caked in dirt and dust from the numerous sinkholes and earthquakes it has dug on Earth. Just look at all those craters on the moon. That's practice. It's also slightly rounder than this, and is engraved with a fleur de lis, so it's possibly French in origin. Now with all that detail, you'd assume that there would be some evidence to go along with it all, right? Well, I have none. Not one piece of evidence for the moon spoon. It is entirely faith-based. I believe it exists, therefore it exists. This is my analogy for Nibiru. You can replace all that detail with the figures proponents use for Nibiru, and you arrive at the same assumption, that there must be some irrefutable evidence that allowed such a detailed conclusion to be made. So what is the evidence for Nibiru? Okay, often there is claimed evidence, but as we've seen it is butchered and distorted in order to fit the Nibiru vision. That is to say, you can take evidence of the supernova remnant G1.9 plus 0.3 for example, and just call it Nibiru, but that's not evidence for Nibiru, it's evidence of proponents lying about a supernova remnant. But just as often there are claims with incredible amounts of detail and yet absolutely no supporting evidence, like this one.
So what will unfold during the last weeks? First, a severe wobble. Second, a lean to the left, where the north pole of Earth tries to evade planet X, which is coming at Earth in a retrograde orbit from the right. The Earth will be basking, north to south, in the light of the sun before this falling to the side rolls into the 3 days of darkness. Third, the 3 days of darkness for the northern hemisphere, when the north pole of Earth continues desperately to escape the north pole of planet X, which is pointing directly at the Earth. Fourth, 6 days of sunrise west, while the Earth stops its momentum and returns to an upright position. During these 6 days, the north pole of Earth will have swung to the right due to momentum. Fifth, a slowing rotation until the Earth stops rotation entirely, with the Atlantic rift facing the Sun and the approaching planet X. Sixth, after 5.9 days of rotation stoppage, the hour of the pole shift when the north pole of Earth is violently pushed away, ripping the crust from the core of the Earth.
Wow, what a story.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the immutable laws of physics contradict the whole premise of your account.
Now that is detailed. It's even timetabled down to the hour, up until the after time. The after time. It's also complete nonsense. The problem with making stuff up and being so detailed means that we can check it out and verify your claims at each and every step. When you go into such detail about the direction it's approaching from, you no longer have to look in every single direction for such an object. You just have to look towards Orion, for example. After all, if you say that that's where it's coming from, then we should find evidence in that direction. We don't have to look incredible distances either. We just have to look out around 10 AU. That's within the orbit of Saturn, and Saturn can be seen with the naked eye. Ah, but, you say, Nibiru is a dark star, a brown dwarf, it's hard to see. Well, not to worry, we'll just use another method to find it. By definition, a brown dwarf must have at least 10 times the mass of Jupiter, and anything with mass in the first place, no matter what made-up number you claim, will affect and be affected by gravity. So we can check the orbits of the outer planets, and even the orbits of thousands of trans-Neptunian objects to see if any of them have been altered. Ah, but, you say, it's coming from the south, underneath the sun and the planets. What the heck is this planet doing to the laws of physics?
A severe wobble.
Then turns right.
Makes a left turn.
A lean to the left.
Back and to the left.
While the Earth stops its momentum.
Where it waits 1.6 seconds.
In midair, mind you.
Where it turns right, then left.
Before this falling to the side rolls into the 3 days of darkness.
Spit then proceeds to ricochet.
Makes a dramatic U-turn.
And returns to an upright position.
Back to the left. Say that again. Back and to the left.
The north pole of Earth will have swung to the right due to momentum.
Right, then left.
After 5.9 days of rotation stoppage.
Made a right turn.
Then heads downward at an angle of 27 degrees.
Ripping the crust from the core of the Earth.
That is one magic loogie.
The more detail you put into Nibiru claims, the more evidence you need to support them. If you don't have that evidence, then we can point to an awful lot of evidence to the contrary. The more detailed your claim becomes, the more tangled it can appear to be, sometimes contradicting itself. It certainly contradicts what other proponents will claim, because nobody can really agree on what Nibiru is. For anything to be accepted by science, it must be supported by evidence. We all know this. Anything else, anything without evidence, is based on faith. Until a cohesive, laws of physics abiding, mathematically accurate, evidence-supported theory for Nibiru is put forward for scientific peer review and publication, Nibiru will continue to be but one thing: an ignorance of reality.
So the spit could have only come from the front and to the right.
But that's not what they would have you believe.
I'm leaving. Jerry's a nut.
When we look into the night sky, it's obvious to see that some stars appear brighter than others. Some stars literally are brighter than others, of course, and this measure is referred to as their absolute magnitude. If we imagine our sun sitting in space, it's obvious to us that the closer we are to the sun, the brighter it will appear to be in our skies. This measure is known as apparent magnitude. In the case of the sun, we measure the apparent magnitude of the sun from Earth to be minus 26.74, where the lower the number, the brighter the object. On Mercury, when it's at its closest to the sun, the sun's apparent magnitude equates to minus 29.3, and out on Neptune, minus 19.3. Similarly, the planets will have differing apparent magnitudes over time, depending on where they, the sun, and the observers on Earth are in relation to each other. Jupiter was recently at its closest to Earth, so its brightness has and does reach up to minus 2.95. If we roll the clock forwards or backwards another 6 months, Jupiter will be on the other side of the sun to us. This added distance means Jupiter will appear to get dimmer, dropping to minus 1.61, and you'll be able to watch this dimming over time for yourselves as you follow Jupiter across the sky. Unless Nibiru has its way, as some have claimed that the planets are only getting brighter, so there are claims that suggest this brightness of planets as seen from Earth is not caused by the distances between objects, but by Nibiru illuminating them. But where is Nibiru? If an object is illuminating something, if it's emitting light, then it stands to reason that it can be seen in at least visible wavelengths, and especially infrared wavelengths. It can be dim to our eyes, sure, but at some point, at some wavelength, it must be visible. Here is an image of Dennis 02554-700, a brown dwarf only 16 light years away. And it's not the blue blob there. This brown dwarf is so faint that you'll have trouble finding it, but it's there. From Earth it has an apparent magnitude of 22.92. Your eyesight struggles to see around 6.5 magnitude objects, but what if it were closer? If it were 1 astronomical unit away from us, the same distance we are from the Sun, this particular brown dwarf would have an apparent magnitude of around minus 9.7. For comparison, Sirius, the brightest star in our skies besides the Sun, has an apparent magnitude of minus 1.47. Now remember, this is still a brown dwarf, it's still a dim star overall, and its absolute magnitude has not changed. But because it is now so close to us, we could see it easily with the naked eye. In fact, the naked eye limit would mean that you could see this star from around 500 astronomical units. That's 10 times further away from the Sun as Pluto is, and visible, if not to your eyes, then to the many telescopes, professional and amateur alike, capable of peering into those distances or into the infrared. To put it simply, no matter how dim you make Nibiru, or how often you say it can't be seen, the factors which go into determining its absolute and apparent magnitude, its size, luminosity and so on, means it must be visible, and this is regardless of where it comes from in relation to the solar system. Nibiru must obey the laws of physics after all, and so for it to arrive in 2012, it must not only be getting considerably brighter with regards to apparent magnitude, but must be close enough already to be seen in some form. And yet no such object can be found on a course for Earth in 2012, at any distance, in any wavelength. And no such object has been found to already be here within the solar system. The apparent magnitude changes of the planets over time is completely normal and can be explained and tested without invoking a brown dwarf for which there is no evidence. That is to say, you do not need to add Nibiru into the equation to arrive at the correct answer. To suggest otherwise requires a lot of evidence on your part, otherwise Nibiru is just a belief, not a scientific fact.